Okay, are you ready to finish our lesson? This is part 2. And we left off with Moses in the land of Midian. Now he's a shepherd taking care of his father-in-law's sheep. After many years, the king of Egypt died. This Pharaoh had been like a grandfather to Moses, because remember, Moses was raised by his daughter, the princess. Now Pharaoh's son would be the new king of Egypt. But how about Moses' family back in Egypt? How are the Israelites doing? Well, we find that they are still crying out to the Lord for help. God had not forgotten his people. He remembered his promise to Abraham. Do you remember the promise God gave to Abraham? He promised him what? A land and a nation. And finally, right, he would be a blessing to all the peoples of the world, because we know Jesus would come from Father Abraham. Well, God was ready to bring about his plan to rescue his people from slavery in Egypt. And one day, Moses is tending the flock of his sheep, of his father-in-law's sheep, on the far side of the desert. And then he came to Horeb. There was a mountain there, and it was actually called Mount Horeb. And it was also considered the mountain of God. As Moses looked up at the mountain, he saw this strange bush. This bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. So Moses decided that he would just go take a look and see what was going on with this bush. In Exodus 3, it records what happened. As Moses drew near to the bush, God called to Moses within inside the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." Moses answered, "I am here." God told Moses, "Do not come any closer, and take off your sandals, for you stand on holy ground." God said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." Wow. I don't know about you, but if God was talking to me and I could hear him in an audible voice, I think it might freak me out. I know I would be afraid. Well, Moses was afraid. And it says that he hid his face and he was afraid to look at God. The Lord continued to speak to Moses. "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the land of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you. Then this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Well, this did not reassure Moses. He wasn't sure about God's plan at all. He had a lot of doubts. You know, God often calls us to do hard things when we follow him, because he is our Lord and we are his children. What should we do when we don't feel like we're strong enough to obey God? Well, we should pray. We should pray and we should talk to God. We should tell him how we feel, and then we need to listen to God's answers. And so Moses says to the Lord, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. 'I am sent me to you.' Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation.'" The elders of Israel will listen to you, God said. Then you and the elders will go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Israelites, the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. So what do you think Moses might be thinking now? Remember, Moses had killed that Egyptian. He had to flee to Midian for his life. The Pharaoh wanted to kill him. I'm pretty sure he wasn't excited about going back and facing whoever might be there. God continued to speak to Moses, saying, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. Wonders. Moses might have been pretty confused at this point. What wonders? But God isn't done. God even reassures Moses by saying, I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed towards this people, so that when you leave Egypt, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver, gold, and clothing, which you will put on your sons and your daughters. So you will plunder the Egyptians as you leave. Isn't God amazing? The Israelites are slaves in Egypt, but when God rescues them and they leave Egypt, they're going to leave as rich men and women with silver and gold and clothing. Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Do you think God understands our fears and our doubts? Well, I know he does, because he created us, right? And he knows everything about us. He is asking Moses to do something that's very dangerous, to go up against Pharaoh himself. So God gives Moses 3 signs to help him with his fears and his doubts. And then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And Moses said, this is a staff. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. So Moses obeyed, and he threw the staff on the ground, and it turned into a snake, and he ran from it. He was afraid. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. I don't know about you, but I would have really not wanted to do this. But Moses did, and he grabbed the snake by the tail and the staff. The snake turned back into a staff right into his hand. But God is not done. He has another sign for Moses. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak, your cape there. And so Moses put his hand inside his cloak, and when he pulled it out, it was white with leprosy. Leprosy was a terrible disease back then. I'm sure it really scared him. And God said, put it back inside your cloak, and he did. And when Moses pulled it out, it was healed. It was just like all his other skin. Wow, that was a miracle. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miraculous sign, that snake and the staff, they might believe the second sign. But if they do not believe the 2 signs, then listen to you, take some water from the Nile River and go and pour it on the dry ground, and it will turn to blood. Even after these 3 miraculous signs, Moses doesn't think he can do what God is asking him. Moses said to the Lord, oh Lord, I have never been eloquent. I have never been a good speaker. I am slow of speech and tongue. This is Moses' 4th argument with God. He didn't want to obey. The Lord said to him, who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will speak, and I will teach you what to say. But Moses argues one last time and says, oh Lord, please send someone else to do it. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, what about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. You know, God could have struck Moses dead right there. He could have chose to use someone else. He could have rescued his people lots of different ways. But you know, we have a merciful God. And God showed Moses great mercy. And God said these words, Aaron is already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you. You will speak to him and put words in his mouth. And I will help both of you speak, and I will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth, and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so that you can perform the miraculous signs with it. And Moses finally obeys. He goes to talk to his father-in-law, Jethro. He says, let me go back to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive. And Jethro says, go, I wish you well. God once again reassures Moses now that it is safe for him to return to Egypt. God said, go back to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead. Isn't it interesting that now he tells Moses that? But God's timing is perfect, and he reassures Moses that there's no one left alive that wanted to kill him. So Moses is patient, or God is so patient and loving, and Moses is now reassured. So Moses takes his wife and his 2 sons, places them on donkeys, and starts back to Egypt, and he takes the staff of God in his hand. The Lord said to Aaron, go to the desert and meet Moses. So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. And then Moses told Aaron everything that the Lord had said, and all the miraculous signs he had commanded him to perform. So Moses and Aaron arrived together in Egypt, and they obeyed God. They did exactly what God said. Moses and Aaron brought all the elders of the Israelites together, and Aaron told them everything that the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people. I don't know if he had to do all 3, but he turned that staff into a snake, showed his hand becoming leprous, and then healed. Maybe he even had to go get the water from the Nile and show that it would turn to blood. But it says they believed. Yay! They believed Moses and Aaron. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and they worshiped God. God's plan of salvation for the Israelites had just begun, starting with his promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. The Israelites had grown into that great nation in the land of Egypt. And it was time to rescue his people from slavery and take them now into the promised land. What God's people didn't know was that God had a plan to rescue them from their sins. And in our next lesson, we will learn what happens when Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and they tell him, God says, let my people go. And we will hear all about this in our next lesson.